Your pain is an unfinished map. The cartographers of the ancient world had a practice that most people have forgotten. When they reached the edge of what was known, the boundary where the explored land dissolved into rumor and mystery, they did not leave the parchment blank. They wrote in careful Latin script the words, Hic Sunt Dracones, here be dragons. They marked the unknown not with emptiness, but with danger, with warning, with the admission that something existed beyond what they could see, even if they could not yet name it. Your pain works the same way. It is not a wound. It is a border, and most people spend their entire lives refusing to cross it. Chapter 1. The Wait Before the Name. His name was Daniel, 34 years old, a structural engineer by training, precise by temperament, the kind of man who could calculate load-bearing tolerances to the decimal point, but could not explain why he woke at 3 a.m. every night with his chest compressed, as though the ceiling had descended while he slept. He was not in crisis by any visible measurement. He earned enough. He was respected at work. He had a relationship that functioned, friends who called, a body that cooperated. From the outside, there was nothing wrong. That was perhaps the most terrifying part. He had learned something very early, in the specific surgical way that children learn things before they have language for them, that his distress was an inconvenience to the people around him, not through cruelty, through something more ambient, more systemic, a mother who was loving but depleted, a father who expressed care through competence, not presence, a household where emotions were not forbidden exactly, but where they created a particular atmospheric pressure that everyone quietly worked to relieve. So Daniel became efficient. He compressed what he felt into something manageable. He did not know he was doing this. That is the nature of survival. You do not choose your armor. You simply wake up one morning and realize you are wearing it. By 34, the armor had become so fused to his skin that he had stopped noticing it was there at all. He would describe himself as fine, and he meant it in the most sincere and tragic sense possible. He was not lying. He simply had no access to the interior room where the truth about him was kept. The pain had not disappeared. Pain does not disappear. It migrates. It finds another room in the house, closes the door, and begins, slowly and methodically, rearranging the furniture. Chapter 2. The Map and Its Edges. There is a concept in existential psychology, explored first in the work of Rollo May, and later developed through the phenomenological tradition, called the boundary situation. A boundary situation is not a metaphor. It is a specific kind of encounter, a moment in which the ordinary structures that organize your life, your roles, your certainties, your habitual ways of moving through the world, suddenly reveal themselves as temporary, as constructed, as thin as paper over an open flame. These moments come in the form of loss, illness, betrayal, or sometimes simply a Tuesday morning when you look at your life and feel, for a reason you cannot locate, that none of it belongs to you. For Daniel, the boundary situation arrived not as catastrophe, but as absence. His relationship ended, quietly, mutually, without rage, and he sat in the apartment they had shared, surrounded by furniture whose arrangement now seemed designed for someone else, and he felt something that was not quite grief. It was more fundamental than grief. It was the sensation of reaching for a wall in the dark and finding no wall. He had not known that her presence was the structure he had placed his entire interior life against. He had not known because he had never looked. The cartographers wrote Hic Sunt Dracones because they were honest. They knew the edge of the map was not the edge of the world. It was only the edge of what had been survived and returned from. Daniel had reached his edge, and like most people who reach it, his first instinct was not to cross it. It was to build the wall back, faster, with better materials. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Avoidance. He worked more. This is common. When the interior becomes unbearable, people reach for the exterior and begin constructing with ferocious energy. More productivity, more discipline, more optimization. There is even a certain cultural approval granted to this response. A man who buries his grief in 18-hour days is called driven, focused, resilient. Nobody speaks of what he is actually doing, which is building a maze to keep himself lost inside. Not because he is weak, because he is afraid of what he will find at the center. The subconscious defense mechanisms that Freud cataloged and that existential psychologists later reframed are not flaws of character. They are, in their original function, acts of profound intelligence, repression, intellectualization, displacement. These are the mind's engineering solutions to an impossible problem. The problem: something true about your experience is too large, too threatening, or too destabilizing to be held consciously. The solution: move it somewhere else. The cost: you move with it. You do not get to stay in the well-lit rooms of yourself while storing the unbearable things in the basement. You follow the unbearable things down. You just don't know you've descended. Daniel was living in the basement of himself and believing he was on the top floor. The 3 a.m. awakenings continued. His hands, which had always run warm, began to feel perpetually cold, as though blood were being rerouted. He developed a specific form of exhaustion that sleep did not touch. The exhaustion of sustained suppression, which is a muscular act, not a passive one. Holding something down requires effort. It requires the constant, unconscious expenditure of energy. He was tired in the way that people who have been carrying something too heavy for too long are tired, but he had not yet seen what he was carrying. Chapter 4. The Counter-Truth. Here is where this philosophy earns the right to be questioned, because there is a version of this argument, the version that appears in popular psychology, in wellness culture, in the soft motivational language that coats contemporary self-help, that says your pain is a gift, your suffering is a teacher. Lean into the wound and you will find your purpose waiting inside it, golden and ready. This version is, in its gentle way, dishonest, and its dishonesty does real damage. Not all pain is instructive. Not all wounds contain revelation. Some pain is simply the consequence of random cruelty, of structural injustice, of the sheer mechanical indifference of the universe to human survival. To tell a person that their suffering was designed to educate them is to perform a kind of spiritual accounting that serves the teller more than the sufferer. It packages chaos into meaning, not because the meaning is there, but because meaninglessness is unbearable to witness. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and built a psychology around the human drive toward meaning, was careful about this distinction. He did not say that suffering has inherent meaning. He said that humans have the capacity to choose their orientation toward suffering. These are not the same claim. Daniel encountered this counter-truth in the body of a therapist's question. He had been sitting across from her for 6 sessions, constructing eloquent analyses of his childhood, his relationship, his defense mechanisms, all technically correct, all carefully designed to demonstrate insight without actually producing it. And she asked him, without particular drama, what he was afraid would happen if he stopped understanding everything and simply felt it. The question collapsed something in him, not because it was kind, because it was precise. He had been using comprehension as a more sophisticated form of avoidance. He had found a way to stand at the edge of the map and draw it in exquisite detail without ever stepping beyond it. The philosophy of existential psychology does not promise that your pain will reveal meaning. It says something harder and more useful. Your pain reveals you, not the version of you that was assembled for social survival. The one underneath. The one that has been waiting, with extraordinary patience, in the room you stopped visiting. Chapter 5. The Descent. What happened next was not dramatic in the way that transformations are depicted in the cultural imagination. There was no single moment of breakthrough, no cathartic release, no sudden clarity that reorganized everything into sense. There was instead a series of small, uncomfortable descents. An afternoon sitting with the cold feeling in his hands and not reaching for his phone. A morning lying in the unchanged apartment and allowing himself to notice that he missed her. Not as a person to return to, but as an architecture he had confused with himself. An evening looking at photographs of himself as a child and feeling, with sudden and bewildering precision, the specific grief of a small person who learned very early that his inner world was too large for the rooms available to him. The physical sensations were unavoidable. This is what the intellectualized version of emotional work does not prepare you for. The body holds the account. When you stop managing your interior and begin to actually inhabit it, the body presents the bill. There is a trembling that comes before tears that have been held back for years. There is a coldness in the sternum that is not temperature. It is something closer to the sensation of weight finally being set down. Daniel sat with these sensations and did not explain them. For a man whose entire identity had been organized around the ability to explain and contain, this was perhaps the most radical act of his life. The map had reached its edge. He had stopped drawing. He was, for the first time in years, simply standing at the border, not trying to name what was on the other side, not building a better wall, not retreating to safer coordinates, just standing, present, with the dragons. Chapter 6. What lies beneath the symptom? The psychological tradition of the 20th century spent enormous energy cataloging symptoms. The 21st century has become fluent in the language of diagnosis. We are, collectively, very good at identifying what is wrong with a person. We are considerably less practiced at asking what the wrongness is pointing toward. Carl Jung, whose work on the shadow remains one of the most rigorous maps of the human interior ever constructed, argued that the symptom is never the problem. The symptom is the problem's ambassador. It arrives at the border of consciousness carrying a message from the parts of you that have been excluded from the self you decided to become. Daniel's 3 a.m. awakenings were not insomnia. They were visitations. The compressed and exiled material of his interior was using the only window left available to it. The brief, unguarded period between sleep and waking, when the prefrontal cortex has not yet reassumed control and the defenses have not yet locked back into position. The body was trying, with considerable persistence, to complete something that had been left open. This is not metaphor. This is neurologically documented process. The brain does not forget. It files, and it keeps returning the filed material to the surface until it is finally processed. The concept of the unfinished map is, at its core, a description of incompletion, not failure. Incompletion. The difference matters enormously. A failed map is discarded. An unfinished map is waiting. It contains the work already done, the coastlines already surveyed, the rivers already named, and it holds open the space where the work remains. Pain in this framework is an open space on the map. It is not proof that you have been broken. It is evidence that there is more territory than you have yet explored. Chapter 7. The outsider at the edge of himself. There is a particular kind of person who is drawn to existential questions, not because they are naturally philosophical, but because the ordinary social explanations for their experience have never quite fit. They have sat in rooms full of people and felt the specific foreignness of someone who does not speak the native language, not because they are superior, not because they are broken, because they are, in some essential way, constituted differently, more porous perhaps, or more attentive to frequencies that most people filter out. Camus called this the absurd experience, the moment in which the gap between your interior world and the exterior world is suddenly nakedly visible. The masks stop fitting, the roles feel like costumes, the ordinary explanations become insufficient. Daniel was this kind of person, though he had spent 34 years interpreting this quality as a deficit, as social inadequacy, as the proof that he was somehow malfunctioning in a world that everyone else navigated effortlessly. The therapist's question had cracked open not just his avoidance, but his self-concept. If his sensitivity was not a failure of adequate adaptation, if it was instead the very faculty that his pain was trying to develop, then everything he had tried to eliminate about himself required reconsideration. The outsider, in existential psychology, is not a peripheral figure. The outsider is the figure who, by virtue of standing at the edge, can see the shape of the thing that those inside it cannot see. Marginality is not only loss, it is also a particular and unreplicable vantage point. The question is never whether you will be the person who stands at the edge. If you are reading this, you likely already are. The question is whether you will interpret that position as exile or as elevation. Chapter 8. The practice of not completing. Modern psychology and modern productivity culture share a curious obsession with resolution, with closure, with the satisfying click of the finished thing. We want our traumas processed, our grief staged through its textbook phases, our crises resolved into wisdom, our open loops closed. The drive toward completion is not pathological, it is human, but it creates a specific misunderstanding about what the interior life actually requires, which is not always completion. Sometimes it requires continuation, presence with the incomplete. Daniel reached a point, after months of the slow, unspectacular work of sitting with himself, where he began to notice that the 3 a.m. awakenings had shifted in character. They were no longer accompanied by the compressed chest sensation. They were accompanied instead by a kind of stillness, an alertness, as though the interior room, having been visited regularly now, had become less threatening and more familiar. He was not healed. He was not finished. The map was not complete, but he had stopped trying to fold it up and hide it in a drawer. He had instead begun to carry it with him, openly, as a working document rather than a shameful draft. This is what the existential tradition calls authentic existence, not the achievement of some final resolved self, not the elimination of suffering, not the transformation of pain into lesson and lesson into post. It is simply the decision to live in relation to your actual experience rather than in flight from it. It is the difference between a person who is perpetually oriented toward the exit and a person who has decided, without drama, to inhabit the room. The room contains the ordinary furniture of a life: loss, uncertainty, love, loneliness, moments of grace, long stretches of gray. Authentic existence does not make the furniture beautiful. It makes it real. Chapter 9. Drawing in the Dark. The cartographers who wrote Hic Sunt Dracones were not defeated by the edge of their maps. They were honest about it, and honesty preserved the integrity of everything they had already drawn. An honest map with acknowledged blank spaces is navigable. A map that fills its blank spaces with invention, with the comfortable fiction that everything has already been surveyed, that there are no dragons, that the territory is fully known, is dangerous. You will follow it confidently into places it cannot actually guide you. Most people are working with invented maps of themselves. They have filled the blank spaces with the stories they were given by their parents, their culture, their earliest wounds. They have labeled the unexplored regions with names borrowed from other people's cartographies. They move through the world following directions that were written for someone else's geography, and then wonder why they keep arriving at places that feel wrong. The pain is the blank space asserting itself. The pain is the map refusing to be falsified any further. Daniel did not arrive at a destination, he arrived at a practice. Every morning, with the specific discipline of someone who has learned that the interior life requires the same regular attention as any other form of maintenance, he sat with himself. Not in the meditative performance that productivity culture has made fashionable, in something quieter and less structured. He simply checked in with the actual state of things. What was present, what was absent, where the edges were. He had become, in the most literal sense, a cartographer of himself, not filling in the blank spaces with fiction, but noting them, acknowledging them, moving carefully along their borders. Chapter 10. The Unfinished Thing. There is no ending to this kind of story. That is the point. The map is never finished because the territory is never static. You are not a fixed object to be fully known and then set aside. You are a living system, and living systems do not resolve. They develop. They encounter new boundary situations. They discover new edges. The work of knowing yourself is not work that completes. It is work that deepens. The difference between a person who has done this work and a person who has not is not that one has answers and the other does not. It is that one has learned to live well in the presence of the question. Daniel, a year after that quiet, mutual ending in the apartment with the wrong furniture arrangement, was sitting in a different room, his own room assembled to his own proportions. The 3 a.m. awakenings had not entirely stopped, but they had lost their compressive quality. Sometimes he lay in the dark and simply let whatever was present be present. Sometimes it was grief. Sometimes it was something closer to gratitude, which surprised him each time it appeared. Because he had not known that gratitude could coexist with incompletion. He had thought that peace required a finished map. He had been wrong about this in a way that had cost him years. The pain had not become a gift. It had not been redeemed into purpose or packaged into lesson. It remained what it had always been. The border country of his interior, the region where the known gave way to the unknown, where the defended self gave way to the actual one. He had stopped trying to eliminate it. He had started instead to explore it. With the same precision he applied to structural tolerances, with the same patience required of anyone who does serious work in difficult terrain. He carried the map with him, unfinished, honest, still being drawn. The cartographers knew something we have mostly forgotten. The most valuable maps are not the ones that claim to know everything. They are the ones that are precise about what they know and honest about where that knowledge stops. Your pain is not proof that something has gone wrong with your life. It is the edge of your map. It is the place where the known territory ends and the actual territory begins. You do not have to cross it all at once. You do not have to cross it dramatically. You simply have to stop pretending that the blank space is not there. Stop writing over it with someone else's legend. Stop filling it with comfortable invention. The dragons are not waiting to destroy you. They are waiting to be seen, and being seen, clearly, honestly, without the interference of the story you have been telling yourself about what you are, is the beginning of everything the map has been trying to show you.